Bell is the author of several books on the struggle for racial justice in this country. His newest is Faces at the Bottom of the Well, The Permanence of Racism. Hello and welcome.
Thank you very much.
Why is racism so indestructible?
Racism is an important stabilizing function, serves a stabilizing function in a society that is built on property. And in a society where a great many whites don't have any property to speak of, certainly don't have as much as those on the top, what this society has given them from the time of slavery to the present is a sense of property in their whiteness, that their skin color enables them to somehow identify and live vicariously the lives of those on the top, as also through the soap operas and the tabloids and the hopes through the lotteries, and to feel superior to blacks who, whatever their status, are deemed on the bottom. The willingness to use race as a detour, as a change of focus away from where the real issues are, has been, that's how slavery got started. Those able to afford slaves were able to convince those whites who could not afford slaves that somehow, even though the presence of slaves meant that the rest of those whites were always going to be in a disadvantaged economic position, that they needed to stay together to avoid, to fight off the slave revolts and all the rest. And we have the same thing today with affirmative action and some of those policies, don't we? But
so there was no white race, but in the colonies of what would become the United States, what did we see in the 1660s, 1670s? We began to see that Africans of indentured servant status realized, as did the white indentured servants, the Europeans who hadn't even been called white yet, that they had a lot of things in common, like the fact that they were all getting their clock cleaned by the elite. And so they would get together more than our history books taught us, to foment rebellion against the elite, to try to get a better deal for themselves on the basis of economic necessity and economic justice. And what did the elite do? When you see that you're outnumbered by black and white folks who are penniless, landless, peasants, you have to do one of two things. You either have to kill them all, but you can't do that because who's going to work? Rich folks weren't going to. So you can't kill them, but you can co-opt them. And so the elite in Virginia, for example, in the colony, begins to give certain carrots to people of European descent, saying things like, we're going to let you own a little land, not much, but just a little. And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. Now you're free labor. And by the way, once you're free labor, you get 50 acres of land just because you're free labor, see? So we're going to cut you in on this deal. We're going to let you enter into contracts. We're going to let you testify in court. And here's the best of all. We're going to put you on the slave patrol to keep those people in line, right? The idea was you're still going to get your clock cleaned. We still don't like you. We still aren't going to really empower you or change your economic subordination, but we're going to make you honorary members of this team, and you're going to help us keep those other people down.
In 1910, a bill was introduced to establish federal control of the manufacture and distribution of narcotic drugs. And the legislation simply died. The sponsors of the legislation looked at who their opponents were and developed a strategy to say, we need to make this a Negro problem. This has to be presented, this has to be, in contemporary terms, reframed as a problem of blacks. And when we reframe it that way, we will be able to overcome the objections of the Harrison Narcotics Act, was this former Foster bill now reintroduced. And because people were quite willing to explain their racial strategies in writing at the beginning of the 20th century in a way that they would not today, we have the historical record of what they had in mind. We have the historical record to say, we portray this as a problem of the lower class, shiftless blacks. That cocaine, in particular, was characterized as the principal cause of the rape of white women in the South. You have to understand that historically, racial fears that whites had of out-of-control blacks was the the ingredient that got this unsuccessful legislation passed. It also has to be understood that this is in part of a broad national political racial dynamic that's taking place. The early 20th century, as the children and grandchildren of the freed slaves are beginning to acquire education and economic power as tradesmen and shop owners and professionals, there is a white counter-reaction. The number of lynchings is increasing. The Ku Klux Klan is growing. The Ku Klux Klan was not a 19th century phenomenon. The Ku Klux Klan was a 20th century phenomenon, which reached its high watermark in the 1920s. That it is important to recognize that the Harrison Act and the way it's being portrayed was part of a white counter-reaction to maintain white privilege economically, socially, politically, in the face of the increased economic and social power that the freed slaves' descendants now had.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. All right, I won't hear. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
Layered. But the drug war had relatively little to do with drug crime even from the outset. The drug war was launched in response to racial politics, not drug crime. The drug war was part of the Republican Party's grand strategy, often referred to as the Southern strategy, an effort to appeal to poor and working class white voters who were threatened by, felt vulnerable, threatened by the gains of the civil rights movement, particularly desegregation, busing, and affirmative action. And the Republican Party found that it could get Democrats, white, working class poor Democrats, to defect from the Democratic New Deal coalition and join the Republican Party through racially coded political appeals on issues of crime and welfare. And the strategy worked like a charm.